So welcome everyone to Climate Ventures Conversations, an event series hosted by the Center for Social Innovation's Climate Ventures. My name is Barnaby Geis, and I'm the Director of Programs at CSI. If you're meeting us for the first time, welcome. The Center for Social Innovation is a community, co-working space, and launchpad for entrepreneurs, organizations, and companies that are building the next economy by putting people and planet first. There are about 1,000 social purpose organizations that call CSI their home, which translates to about 2,500 people. We're also a vibrant online community, and we offer daily opportunities for our members to virtually gather, learn, and collaborate, including through community events, education, and acceleration programs. Climate Ventures is CSI's climate solutions incubator. As a home for climate within CSI, we offer space, programming, and advisory services to the entrepreneurs and innovators working on climate solutions. This includes our National Earth Tech program, an accelerator for startups and nonprofits working on climate and water technology solutions. And you can learn more about Climate Ventures and our work at climateventures.org. Today, we want to acknowledge that for those of us in Toronto, the land on which we operate is located on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Across the world, many Indigenous communities are currently and have been historically at the forefront of struggles against environmental destruction. Indigenous wisdom teaches us the importance of living in balance with the environment. Western science is beginning to understand what Indigenous knowledge keepers have theorized about for generations. For example, the ways in which trees communicate with one another and live in symbiosis within forests. So as we work on climate solutions, we're also endeavoring to learn from and listen to the Indigenous communities who have been doing this work since long before us. Today, as you know, we have with us Bruce Wilson of Iron and Earth, and the founder of Thor Hydrogen. And hosting this conversation, we have my colleague Shay Sinnott. Shay is our Senior Programs Manager of Climate Ventures, where she also manages Earth Tech, our clean tech accelerator. She comes from a background of community education and organizing with a focus on environmental campaigning. She's worked or volunteered with various organizations such as the David Suzuki Foundation, Open Media, and Lead Now. I'll be keeping my eyes open on the chat and Q&A. And for now, over to you, Shay.
Thanks, Barnaby, for kicking us off. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Here we go. So welcome all. Thanks so much for being here. As Barnaby said, my name is Shay Sinnott, and it's a delight to be with you. Got great attendance today, so welcome, welcome. First off, hi, Bruce. How are you?
Hi, really well. Good to be here. Welcome, everybody.
And where are you calling it from? Where are you joining us from?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Barnaby for his words. I echo those sentiments. That was a wonderful statement, and I also want to acknowledge that the land that I live on is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and the Kinbasket people. It's a beautiful valley in the East Kootenays of BC. Extensive, about 70,000 square kilometers, which is about the same size as the country that I originate from, Scotland. I'm privileged to live and work here. It is an honor, and we also honor the legacy of the First Peoples, their connection to the land. And as Barnaby said, it's really important that we endeavor to work on behalf of all, to grow that connection to the land and learn from them. So my task is to help empower and strive for equity, and to give, and importantly, to receive knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Well said. Welcome. Thank you for that. I'm also joining from Toronto or Toronto, though I am from BC and Coast Salish territories. So that was a wonderful opening. So by way of introduction, I'm sure people are familiar with who you are, but just quickly for everyone to know, Bruce sits on the board of directors of Iron and Earth, and we'll talk a bunch about it. But Iron and Earth is a worker-led nonprofit with a mission to empower fossil fuel industry and Indigenous workers to build and implement climate solutions. Trained as an engineer, Bruce worked for over 30 years in the oil and gas industry, and most recently as a general manager with Shell. All over the world, it sounds like, on different projects, but left the company in 2018 to take more urgent action on climate change and the climate crisis. And then, as you heard from Barnaby, Bruce also runs a renewable energy business called For Hydrogen, and advises on hydrogen projects. So impressive background, interesting background given your current work. So thanks so much again for being with us. So as we know from your bio, most of your professional background has been in the oil and gas industry. So I was hoping that we could start, if you could tell us more about your kind of journey into that work, where it took you, and then what you learned.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember my my first lecture in university. I should say I'm a civil engineer by background, civil structural engineer. So it was day one in the classroom, and a professor shocked us all by saying, you know, writing a question on the board, what is the purpose of civil engineering? A lot of blank faces. You know, we weren't quite sure. And so he wrote it up for us. He said, harnessing the great forces of nature for the benefit of mankind. And that sounded big, and it sounded important and quite wonderful. But yeah, I think I've carried that with me, because that is, you know, you've got to keep coming back to that same question, and maybe we can touch on that again. What are the great forces of nature, and how should mankind benefit? There's more in that, but I was, as a structural engineer, I was excited by the prospect of building structures in the North Sea. The North Sea oil boom was in full swing, and you know, the idea of building Eiffel Towers and putting them in the North Sea and then slamming waves against them was just compelling, and getting into that, yeah, didn't really seem like I was getting into the oil business. I was getting into the structural business. I should say, and I think everybody can tell from my accent, I was born in Scotland and grew up in the industrial heartland there. And Scotland's gone through many changes, from coal mining to, you know, shipbuilding to the offshore oil and gas business, and now to offshore wind and a bunch of other things. Hopefully we can touch on that. Mm-hmm. But my trajectory in oil and gas was quite interesting. Just the process of one interesting job after another, and I moved, as you mentioned, I moved quite frequently. I've had the privilege of living in 10 countries, and you know, seeing life as it's lived in those countries, and traveling quite extensively, and you know, that really has been, it's been wonderful. And I think that what that awakened me to was that, you know, the beauty of life, the wonderful way that different cultures lived their lives, the nuances of each culture, and also the fragility of the earth. Mm-hmm. And as I went on, you know, progressing, and I spent, I should say that I spent the latter half of my career with Shell International. I think I represent a dichotomy that's very real in the oil and gas industry, and that's individuals that care deeply about the environment, but yet we're working in that industry. I was not alone. There were many, many people, and I look back at things that I wrote and things that I said and recorded 25 mm-hmm. years ago, talking about the need to balance what we were doing with more renewable energy. I believed that Shell would change, that they would gradually migrate towards renewable energy. And it seemed quite hopeful in the early 2000s with their wind business. It was growing. There seemed like a real movement, but that really gradually diminished. And I think they went back to business as usual, mm-hmm. and set the renewables aside as being infeasible or not something that was aligned with the business process. And I think there was a gradual realization on my part that the trajectory of my philosophy, my life philosophy, was departing more and more from my trajectory as a you know, as a Shell employee, as an engineer in the oil and gas business, I tried to do what I could for the environment. I recycled, you know, I walked places, I cycled, I took the bus. I became a vegetarian a dozen years ago, gradually trying to reduce my footprint, but I realized it just wasn't enough. I had to take action, and I came to that conclusion, and had to conclude that it was time to move on and, you know, do my own thing.
And was there a moment? Was there a tipping point for you, or you said it was a kind of a gradual realization? You also, when we talked in advance, you noted that you were a bit of a voice of dissent within the company. Like,
Yeah.
can you say more about how things changed?
Yeah, it's like everything. It's gradual. There's a building sense, and I don't know why that is in one person more than another. Why one person is more likely to see what's coming and say we need to change. We need to do something about it. But I started to talk about that. I started to push more and more to move from oil and gas focus into renewables, and that was only successful to a degree. And, you know, it was quite clear at one point, and in fact, one very senior leader made it clear, you guys are kind of ring fenced. You're making the money in the oil and gas side of it so that we can invest in renewables. And that sounds quite laudable, but at the same time, it's not the action I wanted to take. So it's a gradual realization, tempered by the fact, and I think this is true for many, many people, they are locked in to their circumstances, or at least they feel locked into it. They feel that they can't make that change. And I'm no different from anybody else.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm hoping we can hone in on the current moment. So your work with Iron and Earth. So I remember, so this is in 2015, I believe, when Iron and Earth began. I was living and working in BC at the time, like quite deeply involved with environmental organizing and campaigning. And I remember there was a ton of buzz at that time when you launched. And that I know that they continue to garner kind of a lot of respect and positive reactions, like even in advance of this conversation, kind of shared what does Iron and Earth do? And typically the reaction I get is like, oh, wow, cool. Like, I'm really glad that that organization exists. I think my perception of it, or, you know, why is it so compelling, I think, is that the origin story of the organization, you know, an organization for and led by workers, and that these are oil and gas workers, from my understanding, who are frustrated by where they can get work. And that they want to transfer this idea of like being able to transfer that knowledge and those skills into, you know, renewable energy, ideally, or into an industry that they feel good about, and that they don't have that dichotomy between their values and then the work that they get to do day by day, but that there's not enough jobs, and that Canada is not leading the way and not taking leadership and action on this. So that's all to say. Can you share a bit more about Iron and Earth's values and work, and why you think it's important within the wider movement?
I'm glad I was going to ask you that question of why were you excited about the buzz? And, you know, I felt the same way when I found out about them. But let me just pull it back a little bit, because I think this is quite important. That when I left Shell, you know, I was full of energy, like go, yeah, let's do this thing. And then I said, what is this thing? What is it I'm doing? What should I do? I have 30 plus years experience. You know, I've been a, you know, project manager, a leader of engineering communities, and what am I fit to do? You know, and I was having that period of uncertainty. You know, that went on for quite a bit, and I wanted to solve world hunger and, you know, all sorts of things. And I thought, well, we can't even do that at home. We can't even do that in Canada. Let's focus here. And through a series of investigations and getting closer to the issues I came across, it was an interview with Liam Hildebrand, who's the executive director of Iron and Earth. And my first instinct was I wanted to call him up and interview him, and maybe write an article about it. Communication is the name of the game. But we got talking, and we realized, although we're a couple of decades apart in age, that we really shared an awful lot in common. And we also shared this understanding that the oil and gas industry is not monolithic. It's not only full of people who are resistant to change, and there's reasons for resistance, but people who wanted to make change and wanted to understand how they could be part of an energy transition. So that for me was great. I quickly agreed to be a member of a board member of Iron and Earth, because I see Iron and Earth as a sort of really strong middle ground. It has a constituency that's oil and gas workers, and we're advocating for oil and gas workers. And again, we'll come back to what is an oil and gas worker, because that's much more complicated than it seems.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole ecosystem around there is going to be affected by change. And so to have an organization that's saying, let us focus on this and how we can help make that change in intelligent ways, is very compelling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Mm.
And maybe just building on that, that I think that, both why it's compelling, but then also the place within the wider movement. I think that I've noticed an assumption from the outside, both on the part of, environmental activists like me, maybe years ago, but then also just others that are a bit disconnected from it, assuming that, as you said, it's a monolithic industry, that companies are also representative of the workers, and that communities, because they're reliant on the mill or the mine or the whatever in there, are representative of, and it's a monolithic thing. When in fact, a huge realization for me was that, like, I don't know what the F I'm talking about. I don't actually know, like, what do we mean by the fossil fuel industry, and who are the people within it, and kind of what's happening. And so I think that's why Iron and Earth resonated with me at the time, continues to. But yeah, I wanted to ask about the work for sure, and kind of what Iron and Earth represents, but also kind of like, do you notice this continued lack of nuance and understanding, and how does Iron and Earth kind of deal with that, or how do you respond to it, I guess?
Yeah, gosh, there is a huge lack of nuance. It's really impenetrable, and I think part of Iron and Earth's job is to parse that, is to pull it apart and say, yeah, exactly, what is this? And I kind of explained right at the start that, when I got into the oil and gas industry, I didn't know anything about oil or gas or whatever. I built structures. I was so far upstream, I could have been building a dam. It was exciting. I was building structures. They were just fabulous. And if you really explore who is in the oil and gas industry, it's very much like that. There are accountants, there are medics, there are people in planning, there are people in manufacturing, logistics, all the way down the supply chain. And it really is an ecosystem. It's a network of different pathways that are 1, 2, 3, 4 steps removed from, if you want to call it the coal face, let's call it that, enemy, but nevertheless reliant on the wealth that is created and shared within communities. And there are communities that, much as there were communities in Scotland that were built exclusively on coal, and in Northern England and all around the world built on one resource, it's the same in Canada. And so we need to sort of break that down. And where that is most important now is when we're talking about conversations around the just transition.
Right.
Because there are traditional definitions of the just transition, which were, I think it was Polish workers and Polish miners in Silesia for whom this was first coined. And it was very clear that it was based around direct workers whose roles were jeopardized by, either market circumstances or government edicts that something was changing, their jobs were disappearing. But it extends much, much further. This idea of who is included in a just transition, it's much probably broader than we can get into today. But it first and foremost is that ecosystem of everybody who makes their living directly from it. But one could argue, and it was argued quite recently in actually a report that came out on 2 days ago by the IPPR, it's the Institute for Public Policy Research in the UK, where they not only talked about just transition being that ecosystem we talked about, but also internationally having an impact there. and
Mhm.
intergenerational too. Let's not forget that when you talk about how you plan for transition, we need to think of the generations ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we dig into that? Can you define in your own words, like, what do you mean? What do we mean by just transition? And then maybe make the connection to Iron and Earth's work in terms of what you
So
view
there
inside
are a
the
set
office.
of circumstances, whether they're generated by the government, whether they're generated by the market. In this case, why is the oil and gas industry under pressure? Why are jobs being lost? Why is it changing? Well, I mean, let's go back to basics quite simply. There is a climate emergency. I've looked at the science on that. I understand it, and it alarms me. And I know we can talk about peeling curves and the amount of CO2 in the air. People might not kind of tie that into something meaningful, but let's talk about carbon budget. If we don't reduce the amount of carbon that is going into our atmosphere by half by 2030, we have a greater than 60-some% chance of seeing temperatures that are over 1.5 degrees globally average. And we should say that in the northern parts of Canada, that's way above average.
Mhm.
That will cause a multitude of different ills. So that's the context there. And, there's more to be said about that, but that's the context, that the climate is changing. Investors, if we want to look at it purely from an investment point of view, investment funds are disappearing from the oil and gas industry. The price of oil is depressed for a number of reasons. But let's just say that the ground, which was once solid underneath the oil and gas industry, and especially in Alberta and Saskatchewan, Western Canada, is eroding, to the point that there's real jeopardy for a lot of people. Added to the government's commitments to change, such as they are at the moment, those all begin to, amount up to writing on the wall. This industry is in jeopardy. And so we need to look to those people who are especially in jeopardy. Now we can wait for bad things to happen, for more people to lose their jobs, and for there to be an economic malaise, the likes of which we perhaps have never seen, or we can take preemptive action now, do some smart things, transition people. It's either you take the bridge or you go down the gulch and back up the other side. And that means job loss, and recovery. Why not take preemptive action? So the just transition is about looking at the totality of this, the multiple pillars of it, and saying, we need to protect people. We need to train them for new jobs. We need to define what these new jobs are. We need to identify who is most disadvantaged by this. And there will be people of all stripe involved. We need to have dialogue at a grassroots level, and it needs to be from the people, or from the people, by the people, driven from the bottom up, and a series of dialogues that make sure we bring everyone with us. We can't drop the ball on this.
Well said. Well said. And that there is a chance that we could, as we've talked about, transition our energy system and yet not do it in a just way and not get it right. Not ensure that the people most impacted, as you articulated very well, are at the center, and that we have information on this. We have data on it. Like, our own government ran a process around just transition for coal workers and communities. It's all there. It was all very loud and clear, and the recommendations for that. It's just a matter of taking action and leadership. So I wish we had more time, but we've only got a half an hour left. So I want to pause and see, Barnaby, if there are questions from the group. I know that stuff's popping up. So if you wanted to chime in with questions from the audience, that'd be awesome.
Sure. Yeah, quite a few. So I'll try to summarize. A couple questions along the lines of what kinds of policies we would need to incentivize and accelerate this shift, this green shift, especially in provinces like Alberta. And then kind of attached to that, a couple people who work in oil and gas and feel frustrated with the kind of slow pace of progress and would like to transition their careers, not sure where those opportunities are, and also will those opportunities really be limited to BC?
Right.
Both kind of like what now, and then also how was that you said that how to transition their own careers? You just cut out for a second.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yeah. So there's two questions more around the policy framework to
Yeah.
accelerate this shift, and then two personal questions of people who've been in the oil and gas sector for a while and would really like to know how they can change career paths and still apply these skills that they have.
Thanks,
Sure.
Henry.
So those are really important questions, and the questions that I hear about a lot. And let me just say that there's policy and mechanism there. You know, there are multiple things that are packed into that. But let me talk about the Iron and Earth 4-point plan. We believe we need to come at this from a number of different angles. And the 4-point plan is not. There are other things. I hope we can touch on some of the other things, and I'll just say it one, the well-being economy. I'd really like to get to that because that's critical. But let's talk about we talk about our workforce first of all. You are more skilled than you think. Yeah, you have skills that you built in the oil and gas industry or in that ecosystem that I talked about that will stand you in very good stead for the future, in terms of how that maps to future work. So what we want to do first of all is we want to train people for jobs in the new economy and in the net zero or low carbon economy. And it's not just training; it's empowering people. It's saying, hey, you know what, you are skilled. Here's what you can do. So there's a little bit of an awakening in there too. Sometimes people don't need training; they just need to be. They need that idea of correlation. Oh, your skills here could work there. Right? That's really important to do. I want to talk more about that, but repositioning, and the government needs to get in and help companies that want to reposition, want to say, oh, there's new markets coming. These are great, but we need to retool. We need to invest. But we're scared to do that because the bottom could drop out of the market and then we're bust. And this is where the government needs to have guarantees that give a long runway, that where companies can look ahead. And this is small and medium enterprises. These companies are the core of the just transition. Government needs to give them guarantees that this market will persist. That's really important to do. So that's the business of repositioning. And it also must be the case for oil and gas companies where, with a bit of a carrot and a bit of a stick, they are mandated to introduce more renewable energy into their mix. Whether it be wind or solar, that is part of their primary power generation. Whether it's things like green feedstock, for example, hydrogen is used in hydrocracking. It's used in steel making. It's used in glass making. It's used in making fertilizer. If it was green, if it was, say, for example, manufactured by some kind of renewable hydrogen process, you're immediately depressing that carbon intensity, and that's an important start. In itself, it's an important start, but it also leads to training on the job. It leads to retraining of people while they're still employed, which is perfect. The other thing is infrastructure, retrofitting. Trying to get that low in carbon intensity, and then repurposing, using, for example, you can use pipelines for moving hydrogen, or in Scotland, I'm looking at a situation where they're looking at offshore platforms for building wind turbines and for generating hydrogen. So we're all worried, or companies are worried about stranded assets, all this, major infrastructure that's suddenly redundant. It doesn't all have to be.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure that we use things in intelligent ways. And the fourth pillar, and this is really important, and it might not seem like something that Iron and Earth should push, but I think we need to all push it because of the loss of biodiversity and because of the need to remove carbon from the air, and that's nature-based solutions. Yeah, well-managed forests, well-managed wetlands, areas where, and this is a point of commonality, we all love our climate and our environment. We love the open spaces that we're privileged to have in Canada and around the world. We need to protect those. And we can utilize those in a way that sequesters carbon, and at the same time as sequestering carbon, it protects the biodiversity in those areas. We need to get that done now. And the other side of the nature-based solutions coin is green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is the greening of our cities, the greening of our environment in intelligent ways that benefit us. I mean, let's pick an example: the green roof. Toronto, bless them, have a mandate on green roofs for commercial buildings over 20,000 square feet. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
If
Cool.
a green roof, you have to pay in a green roof fund to help others build a green roof. What does it do? It can lower your temperature of your building by 4 degrees. A heat island effect is heating things up. Great. Flooding in Calgary, the terrible floods of 2013 would have been ameliorated to some degree if there had been green roofs, water, groundwater recharge and areas like that attenuate the severity of floods. Those kind of intelligent things, even wetlands to filter water, et cetera, let's get smart. And what we're seeing is, if there's a green infrastructure solution as opposed to a gray infrastructure solution, do it. I'm going to come back to one thing, which is pride. I came from Scotland, from the industrial belt of Scotland between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And what I learned from there, I think what I learned from there was that pride is portable. The pride that you put in shipbuilding, the pride you put in coal mining, was transferred into the pride that they showed in the oil and gas industry. And now there seems to be a tremendous shift in pride towards offshore wind, onshore wind, everything green, blue hydrogen. It's possible. What I'm saying to Albertans, people from Saskatchewan and all over Canada, is bring your pride. Your pride is portable. Your skills are portable. So that's the kind of the messaging of Iron Earth.
Just picking up on that last point too, I think like the point I made earlier about my lack of understanding and the lack of nuance. I think it's also just important to note that it just begets like increased alienation and polarization amongst people that, I think it's safe to say so many of us are really concerned about what's happening in the world and want to make a change. But the more we attack each other and call each other out and tear each other down, the less we're going to be able to move forward. So that's why conversations like this one are so important. But I wanted to pick up on a couple.
Can I say something just real quick?
Of course, yeah, of course.
I care about the climate, and I know a lot of people care about the climate, activists, whatever, but we need to choose our words very carefully, because we can say for me, it's time to change. I've made my living in the oil and gas industry, but it's time to change. We need to do something else. It doesn't mean that we disparage individuals, and I don't like. It might sound silly, but I don't like the phrase clean energy, because the corollary of dirty, and it's not so much that it's dirty energy, it's just energy whose time is passing. Yeah, it is polluting. Yeah. So, but how we frame that determines who we bring along. Yeah. Let's get all in this together and pick our words with a spirit of inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't mean that, we don't have constructive conversations or we don't challenge each other, but we challenge the ideas, not the people themselves, I think. And that said, like, it's scary. Like, I feel environmental destruction, like in my body sometimes. Like, I think that, it's a hard time and people really want to change, and then are really frustrated that things aren't changing fast enough. So on that point, I'm wondering if you read the news or heard the fiscal update from Krista Freeland this week, and what you think. What I noticed was that they're still talking about stimulus for a green economy in our recovery, and that there were some specific commitments, acknowledgements of nature-based solutions, EV charging. I noticed energy retrofits. Just wondering for your take on that, and kind of where we're at now.
Yeah, good. Credit to them. It's a good down payment on change. And it's a significant down payment on change, and it's kind of close to the order of magnitude that we were looking for to kickstart this whole thing. You know, Iron and Earth was advocating for, I know it sounds like a lot, but we need major action, $10 billion to train 1 million workers. And we were looking at various tranches of money to apply at, you know, our various pillars. And that's kind of come in, you know, in this initial offering. So I think it's really good. And as you say, there's some commitments, but what it needs now is to build the plans on that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a project manager. I've managed some very big projects. The devil is in the details, and not just in the details, but the execution of the details. We need to execute this in a way. And you know, I mentioned policies and mechanisms, and the mechanisms are really important. And this is why we need, you know, we need the equivalent of some non-partisan group that will actually administer this, where you know, I'll come to the war analogy, the inevitable war analogy. It's not, I've kind of talked against it a little bit, but in this case where you have, and actually I'm reading this book here. I'm gonna plug this. This is Seth Klein's War.
That's so funny. In our last Climate Ventures conversation, Mark Lee also plugged Seth Klein's book.
Oh,
but please go on. No, it's great.
It's very good. You know, he's not, you know, of course he makes clear from the start, I'm not, you know, that he doesn't love war, and he's possibly the last person to write about that. But it was a mechanism that Canada enacted in order to fight the war, to mobilize in the kind of massive way that was required, that is important. And I think that's really something we need to consider, that those mechanisms of application are really, we're all reading Seth Klein, thanks Jay. Yeah. It's really important. How do you get it done? Get her done. You know, what do we need to do? We need this non-partisan body that's going to follow through the mechanisms of change. Can I just, because I omitted to answer this question, and it was about, it was asked earlier on about what do we do with our skills? And at this point, can I say that working with Iron and Earth, what I came to realize was we were actually talking about a fairly narrow band of potential job opportunities. And I think that was frustrating. Well, it's frustrating to me, and I know it's frustrating to many other people. It's like, well, I don't want to install solar panels on a roof, and I don't want to be a wind turbine engineer. Where do my skills fit?
Right.
That's because that work, and this is where the war analogy breaks down. If there were a war, you'd have this broad front, you know, where you'd mobilize troops, and they'd all be in one. And we have this narrow front where we're struggling to get people to the, you know, to the barricades, and that's wrong. And I looked at that and I said, people need more opportunity. And to me, hydrogen is a natural heir to, you know, in terms of the multitude of different things that it can that it can support, you know, from power and heat to mobility to industrial combustion and feedstock and so forth. Not only that, it has tremendous analogies with the skills that you see in the oil and gas industry, you know, from boilermakers to pipe fitters to instrumentation engineers, process control, etc. So you could go right across the gamut. And so I started Thor Hydrogen, which focused on renewable hydrogen. And the idea around that is not immediately to provide jobs, but to build those regional kind of ecosystems that are built around that. You know, it might be that it's used, hydrogen or fuel cells are used to heat a greenhouse, and then so you have people growing, and then you have people, so experts there. So a whole bunch of different pathways that come off of that. So not just necessarily working directly there, but this whole potential for ecosystem. So that was a direct response to those questions. How are we, or what are the jobs of the future? And that's another part, another definition or important aspect of the just transition is vision, is optimism, is a sense we can do this. There are transitional jobs there that are great and are important and meaningful for the people.
Thank you for all that. A lot to respond to. I would love to dig into hydrogen and solutions and ask for like a quick explainer if there are others like me that are a bit confused and a bit skeptical.
Right.
But I think maybe it'd be great to pause because I know there's a flurry of comments going on. Maybe Barnaby, any comments to share that are popping up in the chat, and then as well questions that cover on what we've talked about so far.
Yes, we have a very engaged audience this time,
Awesome.
so it's great. Lots of questions. So I'll apologize ahead of time, as I'm sure I won't be able to capture everyone's questions. So quite a few questions around hydrogen, so I'm happy we're going there. Beforehand, there's been a few questions, and so hopefully this is just a very concise answer, but a little more clarity around exactly what Iron and Earth does, and a question around how people can get involved and support that work.
Sure. Principally, at our core, we do training. You know, we want to facilitate the transition of workers in the fossil fuel industry and the oil and gas industry to jobs in renewable energy. What we do is we develop courses and we deliver those courses. The great thing about the courses is they're hands-on. They're classroom-based and hands-on, so that, you know, individuals get an idea of, you know, the technology and the theory behind things, but they get to do it in practice. Of course, that relies on us having projects and being able to get people close to projects. We have a number of partnerships. One is the Renew Well initiative, which is taking orphaned well pads and turning them into solar locations for solar arrays. And we're working with them and with Medicine Hat College to develop programs for training people. So it's real substantive work to transition people. What we would like to do is expand that offering of training programs and expand our ability to deliver it. That's what's hampering us at the moment, most especially at the time of pandemic. But that at its core is what we do, and then surrounded by the you know, the advocacy for the kind of policies we need to make that happen at scale.
Great, thank you. Well, Shay, you were kind of asking the nuclear question anyways, but I'll sum up the questions here just around a bit of skepticism around hydrogen as perhaps just another way to prop up the oil and gas companies, and how legitimate blue hydrogen really is in our fight to get to zero emissions.
Yeah.
Thanks,
real quick
Barbie.
one on that. Sorry, Shay, you want to ask?
No, it's okay. I was just going to make sure, like, if you could just start basic for us. What do we mean by hydrogen? Blue versus green hydrogen, and yeah, if you could expand on that for those that might be new to it too. Yeah.
As quick as possible. Blue hydrogen is made in, well, it can be made in a number of ways, but the principal way it's made is to take natural gas and using heated steam. They call it steam methane reformation. You strip the carbon off of that, you're left with the hydrogen. There's an existing market. 70 million tons of hydrogen is made a year. It's about $150 billion market. 98% of it is made by SMR. If the carbon is allowed to go in the atmosphere, it's gray hydrogen. If you can somehow sequester the carbon, put it on the ground, it's blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is about 98 and 92% of the carbon is captured. Of course, there's issues around methane and the escape of methane, which is a much more potent greenhouse gas. Green hydrogen, and there are different colors within the green hydrogen, but it principally made from the electrolysis of water. Yeah, we do pyrolysis of organic material, but electrolyzing water, pass a current through it. From renewable energy, it could be hydro, could be solar, wind, etc., tidal, and you get hydrogen. The advantage of that is it's, with the exception of the build out of the equipment, it's a zero emission and zero carbon. So those are the two basics. I'd say that 10 years ago people would talk about natural gas as the bridge to the future.
That's what I was going to say. Is this just the new natural gas?
It's the new natural gas. That's what I think. The blue
natural gas, yeah.
Blue hydrogen is somewhat of a bridge, quite a short bridge actually, and it might get shorter, especially in Europe. It might not even be a bridge at all, but it is the new bridge to the future, because it will, in the initial phase, help build out the infrastructure and awaken people to the possibilities. And if you can sequester the carbon cheaply, as they're doing in Scotland, I could give you an example. Look up the Acorn project run by Pale Blue Dot, and there are existing wells there where they're making hydrogen and sequestering the carbon in these existing oil and gas wells, or former oil and gas wells. So, but to me, the beauty of renewable hydrogen is the decentralization of it. It doesn't need to be on the grid, but it can be. It can be supplemental. It could be a wonderful thing if you're up in remote regions where you're not on the electricity grid, where you want energy independence, potentially in the future for First Nations, where energy is the nexus of everything they choose to do, and real energy sovereignty starts with being self-contained. There's a lot of different ways of doing that, but that to me is the beauty. And also the beauty is that it's regional, and you can build ecosystems around this. So that in a nutshell is the hydrogen. The faith in the future, well, look at Germany. They've just invested 14 billion Canadian in a green hydrogen future. The French about 11 billion, and the European Union is committed to what it calls its 40+40 initiative, which is it's building out 40 gigawatts of electrolysis. Now, you might not have a feel for how much that is, but it's a lot. 40 gigawatts of electrolysis, green hydrogen generation within Europe's boundaries. But being a good neighbor, it's also committing to another 40 in that North African area, Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria, and also Ukraine. So it's helping its neighbors contribute that. Japan's doing the same with Australia and Brunei, creating these ecosystems. So we're really far down the curve, and they are focused on green hydrogen. And let's take our cues from them. That has the potential to account for between 15 and 20% of the energy demand by 2050.
Thank you for that breakdown.
And because I think there's other things that are really, also building blocks that need to be talked about.
Do you have some on the tip of your tongue? Other solutions?
Well, no, I wanted to touch on the well-being economy.
Okay.
Really briefly, if I might, because
of course.
Then it comes back to the fact we can do this energy transition. We can make it successful, and we can get to net zero. We can lock in the inequalities that are already baked into our system if we don't get the transition right. And that is, it's actually more than the just transition. It's about new paradigms. It's about saying what is well-being? What is the well-being economy? What are we working for? Where's the meaning? Where's the the community, the care? What are the new metrics of living? And that's a huge piece of it. I just want to give a plug to the Wellbeing Alliance. We all look them up. They're a great organization. I'm a member of that, and they are coming together across a lot of nations to give people the wherewithal to talk about what it is to have a new economy that actually is focused on different metrics of life and living and success apart from gross domestic product. So I think that when we talk about advancing Canada, it's about the industry, and it's about the great jobs. It's about the communication with people at the grassroots level. It's about understanding who is included in the just transition, who is in jeopardy, who is vulnerable, and embracing all of these people. It's about thinking about what the new metrics of our living are that are meaningful. And it's thinking about our neighbors across the border, across the sea, and saying we can take that technology and we can share that. We must share that they are included in the just transition, not just it's not just the vulnerable here, it's in other countries.
Elsewhere, yeah.
Generations.
Yeah. Another plug from me would be the Just Recovery for All coalition and collective that came together in response to the pandemic. And what I love about that community collective call is that it on its face, it doesn't seem as if it's about the clean green transition. It puts people at the center, especially Indigenous peoples, workers, people in other countries, those most impacted, and it focuses on like, what if we were to make change to make people's lives better, and that is a way in which we can address our challenge of the climate crisis and environmental challenges. It doesn't have to be an either or, it has to be a both and. So
Wonderful.
that's my plug too. I think so. We've only got a little bit of time left. I have one question that I would love to hear your reply on, and then Barnaby, I'll pitch it to you and I'll stop. I think what I've noticed, okay, so first of all, Iron and Earth, I know started kind of in 2015 when oil prices were falling, and then flash forward to 2020 when we've had this wild year that started with the crash in the price of oil, and then negative prices in oil futures, which I find difficult to understand. And then you have like analysts, even those at BP, British Petroleum, suggesting that we've hit peak oil. So I think that we're kind of seeing this tide turn, right? And you see all of these big banks, asset managers, governments the world over making net zero commitments. But then we're also seeing this like refusal, this like doubling down, and I just can't square it. And so I guess I'm just wondering, as somebody that, as you noted, kind of represents a bit of a dichotomy and, comes from that industry and yeah, like how do you reconcile that? And what do you think about this mounting call to, quote unquote, like let the fossil fuel industry die? I'm just wondering if you could comment on all of that.
Well, it's not a question of let the fossil fuel industry die. The fossil fuel industry, we used to light our lamps with whale oil. That seems ridiculous now. We'll laugh about that a little bit, and as we go through, it is a natural transition, and first thing we have to say is that the scientific understanding of where we stand is gained because of the technological advances that we built on the back of coal power and oil and gas power. It's an irony, but it's a very important recognition. We understand where we are because our science has reached a level because of what we've done, and we're like, oh gosh, we need to change. The writing is on the wall for a number of reasons. You look at the task force for climate-related financial disclosure, this mechanism whereby companies are being encouraged and eventually they'll be mandated to say, how exposed are you to risk in the future? And investors, well, they're not your friend. Investors are investors. Especially the institutional investors, they will look at things in a wavelength of 10 and 20 and 30 years because that's, they're paying pensions. They manage risk. The military manages risk. Now, you might look at the Trump government and its denial, but you look at their military, they're planning for risk. They absolutely are. So, the words let the oil industry die, the oil industry is passing through a transitional phase where it will be replaced by something better and more compelling. And I think it is wrong for us to, I think Buckminster Fuller, I'll paraphrase Buckminster Fuller when he said, you don't get people to change by telling them how, broken and bad and whatever their system is. Show them something new and compelling that is better, that we all desire. So, yeah, I think we have hit peak oil. BP, their report came out and said, looks like we've hit peak oil. In absolute terms, the demand will start to diminish. In terms of the pandemic, John Elkington of Wallens, one of the sort of the godfathers of the climate movement, he said the pandemic is the X-ray that's held up to our society that exposes all of the things that we lack or the inadequacies, the things that we must change. And one of the things we must change is this attitude in the oil and gas industry that it's somehow masculine to push back against that. I did an interview with an organization called Next Gen Men, and they talked about a certain brand of toxic they called it toxic masculinity, or masculinity that was opposed, that denied that climate change was a real thing because it was I guess, the manly thing to do. But hold on a minute. Isn't a role, men and women as protectors of our family, to look down the road, see the risks that are coming, and make provisions to protect our family? That's what I'm doing. I'm sure that's what you're doing, and what everybody on this call is thinking about. How do we protect our families? That is femininity. That is masculinity at its best. It's what makes us who we are as parents and leaders and teachers. So to deny what is there, and you just need to look at the World Economic Forum and their report. They do a global risk report annually, and this year, 2020, for the first time in history, all top 5 risks were climate related or environment related. The writing's on the wall. How big does it need to be? If you are and purport to be a protector of your family, of your community, of your society, of your country, things are changing.
Yeah.
Let's take action.
Yeah, just to jump in, because I've taken us too far. Yeah, gender aside, it's about being a human being and an animal on this planet and taking care of people on planet, as we would say at CSI. And so yes, the writing is on the wall. Behavior that doubles down, I find reckless. And so I think it's incumbent on us at this intense time of change and transition to call on our decision makers and keep the pressure up, because we've seen lots of commitments, but we've yet to see specifics in writing with budgets attached to them, and we need it now. So yeah, it's 1 o'clock. Shoot, Barnaby, any closing question from the group? Maybe something forward thinking and or comments. Though I could ask something too in closing if not.
Yeah, I think why don't you go ahead and ask something in closing? I have questions, but I feel Bruce had such an eloquent place to end there that I don't want to take us into a whole other sphere of conversation.
Okay, maybe to end on a personal note, Bruce, we've talked a lot about my question was going to be what keeps you up at night, and then also what brings you hope. We've talked a lot about what keeps you up at night, so maybe if we could end what brings you hope, and any calls to support or action in closing. You get the last word.
What brings me hope is that there are so many people who feel the same way. There are so many people who want the same things, that I know if we really choose the dialogue of inclusion, and we find mechanisms such as CSI, and I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about your wonderful organization, but bringing people together like this to say, how do we do this? Let's get it done. And impressing upon our government that we need that gives me hope. There are ways through this, and humans have done it before, and we'll do it again, but we need to get our sleeves rolled up and start now.
Let's get her done. I think that's a good message to end on. Thanks so much, Bruce. Really, really appreciate you joining us. Yeah. And thanks so much for everybody that tuned in. We'll be in touch over email, and then we have lots of events like this one coming up in the new year. So we'll be in touch, and thanks so much.
Thanks for attending, everybody.